Uber driver returns passenger's forgotten wallet with $10,000. Unaware the owner was testing people's honesty. The thought hadn't even crossed Marco's mind as he stared at the worn leather wallet in his trembling hands. $10,000, more money than he'd seen in years, just sitting there on the back seat of his beat-up Toyota. Rain pattered against the windshield, each drop a tiny explosion in the silence of the empty car. The digital clock on his dashboard read 11:47 p.m. End of shift. End of another day where the bills outweighed the earnings. Marco's fingers brushed across the smooth leather. It would be so easy, so simple. Nobody would know. The man who'd left it, tall, well-dressed, distracted on his phone, had mentioned staying at the Westmore Hotel downtown. Probably some executive who wouldn't even notice 10 grand missing. The weight of the wallet seemed to grow heavier in Marco's palm. He thought about his daughter's asthma medication, the 3 months of back rent, the final notice from the electricity company that had arrived that morning, red letters screaming their warning. Just this once, whispered a voice in his head, just to get ahead. Marco closed his eyes, feeling the cool leather against his skin. His mother's voice drifted through his memories. Your name is all you truly own in this world, mijo. With a deep sigh that fogged the cold window, he put the car in drive. Victor Chen sat in his hotel room, staring out at the glittering city lights that seemed to mirror the stars above. The whiskey in his crystal glass caught the light as he swirled it absently. 42 wallets, 42 tests, 39 failures. His experiment had begun 6 months ago, shortly after his wife's death. Losing Julia had broken something fundamental in him. Not just his heart, but his faith in humanity. The betrayal that had preceded her passing had shattered his worldview. Now he was left with nothing but her memory, a fortune he couldn't enjoy alone, and a growing cynicism that threatened to consume him. His phone remained silent on the nightstand. He hadn't bothered to track this wallet. After so many disappointments, why expect anything different? People took what wasn't theirs. That was the harsh lesson life had taught him over and over. Victor took another sip of whiskey, letting the burn distract him from the hollowness in his chest. The Westmore Hotel loomed like a gleaming monolith against the night sky. Marco parked across the street, the wallet now sitting on the passenger seat like an unwanted companion. His car sputtered ominously as he turned off the ignition. Another problem he couldn't afford to fix. The lobby of the Westmore was all marble and soft lighting, making Marco acutely aware of his worn jeans and faded jacket. The receptionist's eyes narrowed slightly as he approached. I'm looking for a guest, Marco said, his voice softer than intended. I was his Uber driver earlier, and he left his wallet in my car. Guest name? She didn't look up from her computer. I don't know his name. Marco pulled the wallet from his pocket, careful not to open it. But he was tall, Asian, wearing a gray suit. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. Mr. Chen, perhaps? Victor Chen? The name meant nothing to Marco, but he nodded anyway. Maybe. Can you call his room? The receptionist's professional mask softened slightly. That's unusually honest of you. She reached for the phone. One moment, Marco shifted his weight from one foot to the other, exhaustion settling into his bones. He checked his watch, nearly 1 a.m. now. Carlita would be wondering where he was. His 14-year-old daughter tried so hard to pretend she wasn't worried about him when he worked late. Mr. Chen says you can come up. Room 1142. Victor hadn't expected the call. He'd been about to turn in for the night when the phone rang, yanking him from his dark thoughts. Now hearing the gentle knock at his door, he felt a strange mixture of surprise and suspicion. He opened the door to find a man roughly his own age, though the similarities ended there. Where Victor was polished and well-fed, this man was all angles and tired eyes. Hispanic, maybe early 40s, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of hard years. Mr. Chen? The man held out the wallet. You left this in my Uber earlier. Victor didn't reach for it immediately. Did you look inside? A flicker of something, hurt perhaps, crossed the driver's face. No, sir. It's not mine to look through. There's $10,000 cash in there. The driver's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't withdraw his outstretched hand. It's still your wallet, sir. Victor took the wallet slowly, testing its weight. Everything felt intact. He opened it, counted the bills methodically while the driver stood awkwardly in the doorway. What chico you want? What's your name? Victor asked, not looking up from the counting. Marco Vega. Well, Marco Vega, do you know how rare you are? Victor finally met the man's eyes. This is the third wallet returned out of 42. Marco's brow furrowed. I don't understand. You're not meant to. Victor pulled out a $100 bill and held it out. Thank you for your honesty. Marco looked at the money, then back at Victor's face. Something in the driver's expression shifted, a subtle hardening around the eyes. "Keep your money, Mr. Chen. I didn't do it for a reward." He turned to leave. "Wait." Victor wasn't accustomed to being dismissed, especially not by someone who clearly needed the money. "Please, I insist." Marco paused but didn't turn around. "Good night, sir." Victor watched the drivers retreating back, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Was it shame? Confusion? Whatever it was the first real emotion he'd felt in months that wasn't tied to grief or bitterness. On impulse, he called out, "Have coffee with me." Marco stopped, turning slowly. "What?" "Can of coffee. Tomorrow." Victor wasn't sure why he was asking. "I'd like to talk to you. I have a shift tomorrow." "After your shift, then." Victor found himself strangely invested in the answer. "Please." Marco studied him for a long moment. "Why?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Victor settled for the truth. "Because you're the first person in months who surprised me." Marco shouldn't have agreed to the coffee. He had bills to sort through, another early shift the next day, and Carlita's parent-teacher conference to prepare for. Yet here he was, sitting in an overpriced cafe, watching Victor Chen methodically stir his Americano. "You look exhausted," Victor observed. Marco almost laughed. "That's what happens when you chase a wallet across town at midnight instead of sleeping. You could have waited until morning." Marco shrugged. "You might have needed your ID, your credit cards. The cash didn't tempt you at all?" Victor's eyes were sharp, assessing. "I didn't say that." Marco met his gaze directly. "It tempted me plenty." The honesty seemed to catch Victor off guard. "Yet you returned it." "Yet I returned it." Marco sipped his coffee, the rich warmth a small luxury. "Why?" Marco considered the question. "Because that's who I need to be." He paused. "For my daughter. For myself." Victor leaned forward. "Tell me about your daughter." It was strange how easily the words came. Marco found himself talking about Carlita, her asthma, her art, her quiet strength in the face of her mother's abandonment 3 years ago. He talked about driving 18 hours a day sometimes just to keep their small apartment, about the medical bills that kept piling up. "She never complains," Marco said, a note of pride creeping into his voice. "But I see it in her eyes. The worry. No 14-year-old should have to worry so much." Victor listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When Marco finally fell silent, embarrassed by how much he'd revealed, Victor simply asked, "May I see a photo of her?" Marco hesitated, then pulled out his phone. The background was a picture of Carlita on her last birthday, smiling despite the obvious wheeze that had followed her all day. Victor studied the image. "She has your eyes. Kind eyes." The observation, so simple and yet so personal, caught Marco off guard. He tucked the phone away, suddenly feeling exposed. "What about you?" he asked, deflecting. "Why were you testing people with wallets?" Victor's face closed like a door slamming shut. "That's a longer story." "I've got time." "No, you don't." Victor's tone was matter-of-fact. "You have another shift in an hour, according to what you just told me." Marco checked his watch and cursed softly. "I should go." Victor nodded, then pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. "My personal number. If you ever need anything, there's to win mana de Chordatkin." He slid the card across the table. Marco didn't take it. "I don't need charity, Mr. Chen." "It's not charity. It's..." Victor seemed to search for the right word. "It's recognition. Of something rare." Marco still didn't move to take the card. Victor's mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Has anyone ever told you that pride can be as much a burden as poverty?" "My mother. Every day until she died." Despite himself, Marco found an answering smile tugging at his lips. "Smart woman." Victor pushed the card closer. "Take it. Use it. Don't use it. Your choice." Marco finally pocketed the card, though he had no intention of calling. "Goodbye, Mr. Chen." "Victor," the other man corrected. "And I have a feeling we'll see each other again, Marco Vega." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of long shifts and mounting worries. Carlita's asthma worsened with the changing weather, requiring a hospital visit that devoured what little savings Marco had managed to accumulate. The apartment building's elevator broke again, meaning his daughter had to climb 5 flights of stairs daily, each step a struggle for breath. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday, the same day the hospital called about the outstanding balance. Marco sat at their small kitchen table, surrounded by bills, the numbers swimming before his exhausted eyes. Victor Chen's card sat untouched in his wallet. He'd thought about calling, had taken the card out several times, but pride always stopped his fingers from dialing. Whatever recognition Victor had offered, Marco couldn't bring himself to accept it. A soft cough from the doorway pulled him from his thoughts. Carlita stood there in her pajamas, her dark hair messy from sleep. "You should be in bed, mija," Marco said, quickly gathering the bills into a pile. "I heard you come in." She moved to the refrigerator, her breathing audibly labored. "Did you eat?" The question broke his heart. Even now she was worried about him. "I'm not hungry." The lie came easily. He'd been skipping meals for days, making sure Carlita had enough. She poured herself a glass of water, eyeing the pile of papers. "Is it bad?" Marco forced a smile. "Nothing for you to worry about, Dad." The word carried a gentle reprimand. "I'm not a little kid." "No," he agreed softly. "You're growing up too fast." She sat across from him, pushing a stray bill aside to make room for her glass. "We're going to be okay, right?" The question hung in the air between them. Marco had always promised her the truth, even when it was difficult. But how could he tell her that they had less than a week before eviction? That he couldn't afford both her medication and the rent? "We're going to figure it out," he said finally. Not quite a lie, not quite the truth. Carlita reached across the table and squeezed his hand, her fingers cool against his skin. "I could get a job. After school." "Absolutely not." The words came out sharper than intended. "Your job is school, and getting better." "But..." "No buts." Marco squeezed her hand in return. "I'm the parent. Let me worry about the money." She didn't argue, but the look in her eyes, too old, too knowing, stayed with him long after she'd gone back to bed. Marco pulled out Victor's card again, turning it over in his hands. The man had seemed genuinely interested in helping. But at what cost? Nothing came for free in this world. That was another lesson his mother had taught him. With a sigh, he tucked the card away again. There had to be another way. Victor was in the middle of a board meeting when his personal phone vibrated. He rarely received calls on this number, and a quick glance showed an unfamiliar local number. Excusing himself with a gesture to his COO to continue the presentation, he stepped into the hallway. "Victor Chen." There was a pause, then, "It's Marco Vega, the Uber driver." Something inside Victor lifted at the sound of the man's voice. "Marco, I was beginning to think you'd thrown my card away." "I almost did." The voice on the other end sounded strained. "I wouldn't be calling if..." What do you need?" Victor cut him off, sensing the difficulty the other man was having. Another pause, longer this time. "My daughter's in the hospital. Her asthma. It's worse. They want payment before they'll release her, and I can't..." The words broke off. "Which hospital?" Victor was already walking toward the elevator, signaling to his assistant to cancel his remaining meetings. "General Memorial. But I'm not asking for money, I just need..." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Victor said, ending the call before Marco could object. The drive to the hospital gave Victor time to think. He'd spent the week since meeting Marco investigating the man quietly. A background check had revealed no criminal history, good credit until 3 years ago when his wife had left, and a reputation as a reliable, hard-working employee. Marco Vega was exactly what he appeared to be, a good man in difficult circumstances. It had been disconcerting. Victor had grown accustomed to discovering the hidden flaws, the secret corruptions that lurked beneath the surface of seemingly decent people. Finding none in Marco had left him oddly unsettled. The hospital was bustling with midday activity. Victor found Marco in the pediatric ward, slumped in a chair outside a room, his head in his hands. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by worry and exhaustion. "Marco." The driver's head snapped up, eyes widening in surprise. "You actually came." "I said I would." Victor sat beside him. "How is she?" "Stable now." Marco ran a hand over his face. "But they want to keep her under observation, and the insurance. There are issues with coverage." "How much do they need?" Marco's jaw tightened. "I didn't call you for money." "Then why did you call me?" Victor kept his voice neutral, genuinely curious. "I thought..." Marco looked away. "You know people. I thought maybe you could help with the insurance company. Make a call." Victor almost smiled at the man's persistence in avoiding charity. "I can certainly do that, but it might take time. The hospital will want payment in the meantime." Before Marco could object again, the door to the room opened and a young girl in a hospital gown appeared, an oxygen mask clutched in one hand. She had her father's eyes just as Victor had observed in the photo, though they were currently wide with curiosity. "Dad?" Her voice was raspy. "Who's this?" Marco stood quickly. "Carlita, you should be in bed." "I heard voices." She studied Victor with uncanny perceptiveness. "Are you the wallet man?" Victor blinked in surprise. The wallet, man? Dad told me about you. She extended her free hand with surprising formality. I'm Carlita Vega. Thank you for not thinking my dad stole from you. Victor found himself shaking the girl's hand, oddly touched by her directness. Victor Chen, and I should be thanking your father for his honesty. He's always honest, she said with absolute conviction, even when it would be easier not to be. Marco placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Back to bed, Mia. You need to rest. She allowed herself to be guided back into the room, but not before giving Victor another appraising look. Are you going to help us? The question, so simple and direct, seemed to fill the hallway. Victor met her gaze. Yes, I am. Her smile transformed her face, revealing dimples that deepened in her cheeks. Good. Dad needs someone to help him for a change. When Marco returned to the hallway, his expression was a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. She's too direct sometimes. We're working on tact. I prefer directness, Victor said honestly. Now let me speak to the billing department. 2 hours later, Carlita was discharged with a new treatment plan, fully covered by an anonymous donation to the hospital's patient assistance fund. Victor had also made several calls to the insurance company, leveraging his considerable influence to expedite coverage approval for her ongoing care. In the parking lot, Marco struggled visibly with his pride. I don't know how to repay you. You already did, Victor replied. 3 weeks ago, when you returned my wallet. Marco shook his head. That doesn't equal this. No, Victor agreed. What you did was worth far more. The following Saturday, Victor found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, helping someone move. Marco and Carlita's eviction couldn't be stopped, but Victor had found them a ground-floor apartment in a better neighborhood, closer to Carlita's school and with better air quality. Marco had initially refused, but Victor had framed it as an investment property he'd been meaning to rent out anyway. The fiction was transparent to both of them, but it allowed Marco to accept the help without feeling like a charity case. This is the last box, Victor said, setting down a carton labeled kitchen in Carlita's neat handwriting. The new apartment was modest but clean, with large windows that flooded the living room with natural light. Carlita had immediately claimed the smaller bedroom, delighted by the window seat that overlooked a small community garden. I still think the rent is too low, Marco said, wiping sweat from his brow. Take it up with the management company. Victor had created a shell corporation specifically for this purpose, ensuring all rent payments went to an account that would eventually be returned to Marco as a tenant bonus program. Carlita emerged from her room, her face flushed with excitement rather than asthma for once. Dad, can we order pizza to thank Mr. Chen? I mean Victor? Marco looked at Victor questioningly. I'd like that, Victor said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Later, sitting around a pizza box on moving blankets because the furniture hadn't arrived yet, Victor found himself telling them about Julia. The words came haltingly at first, then in a rush. How she'd been diagnosed with cancer 4 years ago. How his business partner and best friend had embezzled millions during Victor's distraction with her care. How Julia had died believing they were financially ruined. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, Victor said, staring at his half-eaten slice. It was that it changed how I saw everyone. Every interaction became a transaction. Every kindness seemed to have an ulterior motive. So you started testing people, Carlita said, understanding immediately. With the wallets, Victor nodded. 42 wallets, each with ID, credit cards, and cash. Left accidentally in taxis, Ubers, restaurants, hotels. And only 3 came back, Marco said quietly. Only 3, Victor confirmed. Your return was the only one where the money was completely untouched. Marco looked uncomfortable with the praise. I'm not special. That's where you're wrong, Victor said. In a world where taking what isn't yours has become the norm, choosing honesty is revolutionary. Carlita nudged her father. See? I told you you're a superhero. Marco laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the empty apartment. A superhero who couldn't even keep a roof over your head. But you did, she insisted. You always do. Victor watched their interaction with a strange ache in his chest. This was what he'd lost when Julia died. Not just her, but the sense of belonging to something larger than himself. A family. A shared history of inside jokes and mutual understanding. I should go, he said suddenly, the intimacy of the moment making him uncomfortable. Stay, Carlita said at the same moment Marco said, Of course. They looked at each other, father and daughter, some unspoken communication passing between them. What my daughter means, Marco said carefully, is that we have ice cream in the cooler, and you helped us move. The least we can do is feed you dessert. It was such a small thing, being invited to stay for ice cream. Yet Victor felt its significance like a physical weight. "I'd like that," he said, his voice rougher than intended. Weeks turned into months. Victor found himself drawn into the Vega family's orbit, first through practical assistance, helping Marco secure a better-paying job as a driver for Victor's company, ensuring Carlita had the medical care she needed, and then through a genuine friendship that took him by surprise. There were Sunday dinners where Marco cooked his mother's recipes, movie nights where Carlita insisted on documentaries that left them all deep in discussion, and quiet evenings when Victor would help her with homework while Marco worked late shifts. Victor found himself laughing again, caring again. The bitterness that had encased his heart since Julia's death began to crack, allowing light to filter through. One evening in spring, nearly 6 months after the wallet incident, Victor arrived at their apartment to find Marco alone, sitting on the balcony with 2 beers. "Carlita's at a friend's for a sleepover," Marco explained, handing Victor a bottle. "Her first. I've checked the inhaler 3 times and called the mother twice." Victor smiled. "She's going to be fine." "I know," Marco sighed. "But worrying is part of the job description." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the city skyline. Victor found himself studying Marco's profile. The strong line of his jaw, the perpetual worry creased between his brows that had softened in recent months, the flecks of gray at his temples. "Can I ask you something?" Marco said suddenly. "Of course. Why us?" Marco turned to face him. "Of all the people you could help, why did you choose us?" Victor considered the question carefully. "At first it was because you surprised me. You were an anomaly in my experiment, the honest man in a dishonest world. And now?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Victor took a sip of his beer, buying time. "Now it's because you and Carlita remind me what it's like to be part of something real." He met Marco's gaze directly. "You've given me far more than I've given you." Marco shook his head slightly. "That's not true." "It is." Victor set his beer down. "You returned more than my wallet that night, Marco. You returned my faith in humanity, in the possibility of genuine connection." A charged silence fell between them. Victor was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the warmth radiating from Marco's body in the cool evening air. "I've been thinking," Victor said carefully, "about starting a foundation, using my wealth to help families like yours. Single parents struggling with medical bills, housing insecurity." Marco's expression was unreadable. "That sounds like a good idea. I'd want you to run it." Victor hadn't planned to make this offer tonight, but the words tumbled out. "You understand the needs better than I ever could, and people trust you instinctively." "I know I did." Marco stared at him in shock. "I don't have the experience or education for something like that." "You have integrity. Everything else can be learned." Victor leaned forward slightly. "Think about it. No pressure." Marco was quiet for a long moment. "Is this your way of trying to help us again?" "No," Victor said honestly. "It's my way of trying to help myself. To do something meaningful with the fortune I've accumulated. To create the kind of world I want to live in." He paused. "With the kind of people I want in my life." The implication hung in the air between them. Marco's eyes searched his face, looking for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or ulterior motives. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him. "I'll think about it." Later that night, as Victor drove home, he realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since Julia's death, he was looking forward to tomorrow, to next week, to the future. All because an Uber driver had returned a wallet. 1 year later, the Vega Chen Foundation celebrated its official launch with a gala fundraiser. Marco, now the executive director, gave a speech about second chances and the ripple effects of small acts of kindness that left few dry eyes in the house. Carlita, her asthma well controlled with proper treatment, performed a violin piece she'd composed herself titled "The Wallet," a moving melody that began with hesitant, questioning notes and built to a triumphant, joyful conclusion. Victor watched them both from the side of the stage, his heart full. The foundation had already helped dozens of families facing similar circumstances to what Marco and Carlita had endured. Each success story felt like a personal victory, a reclamation of the goodness Victor had once stopped believing in. After the event, the 3 of them stood on the balcony of the venue, looking out at the city lights. "I never thought returning a wallet would lead to all this," Marco said, shaking his head in wonder. "I did," Carlita declared with teenage certainty. "Well, not exactly this, but I knew it was important." Victor smiled at her. "Wiser than both of us, as usual." She grinned, then yawned dramatically. "I'm going to find the dessert table before they pack it up." Don't talk about anything interesting without me. As she walked away, Marco turned to Victor. Thank you. For everything. Victor shook his head. I'm the one who should be thanking you. We could go back and forth all night on that, Marco said with a smile. Or we could agree that sometimes people come into our lives exactly when we need them. Even when it's disguised as a simple Uber ride, Victor added. Even then, Marco's hand found Victor's, their fingers intertwining naturally, a gesture that had become familiar and precious over the months. Victor thought about the wallet test he'd devised in his darkest days, a cynical experiment born of grief and betrayal. How could he have known that it would lead him here? To healing, to family, to love. You know, Victor said softly, I stopped the wallet tests after I met you. Good, Marco replied. It was a terrible experiment anyway. Victor laughed. Was it? 42 wallets is hardly a representative sample size. Marco's eyes twinkled with humor. And your methodology was flawed. You were looking for reasons to believe the worst in people. And instead, I found the best. Victor squeezed Marco's hand. I found you. Inside, they could hear Carlita playing her violin again, the sweet notes drifting through the open doors. The melody seemed to carry all the emotions of their journey, the hardship, the unexpected connection, the healing, and finally the joy of building something new together. An Uber driver returns a passenger's forgotten wallet with $10,000, unaware the owner was testing people's honesty. One small act of integrity, 2 lives transformed, countless others touched by the ripples spreading outward. Sometimes, Victor realized, the tests life gives us aren't about passing or failing. They're about recognizing the extraordinary in the ordinary, the light that shines through even the smallest cracks in our armor, the possibility that always exists for kindness to change everything.